your computer that asks you to accept the recording so that you can stay in the meeting with that permission. Welcome everybody. I'm happy to see so many people because I know it's May and it's easy to start to feel like, depending on your position, like you're looking at the finish line and just try to push through to that. But your participation here today indicates to me at least, a continued interest in making sure that we can do our very best to the very end. And probably also an acknowledgement that that our summers and our falls are likely to look very different than they did last year. And so equipping ourselves with the technological skills to connect with our students is likely to be relevant beyond the next couple weeks and beyond the month of May and June. So our topic today is engagement and tools within Zoom. And it is specific to Zoom, although I think that a lot of you will be able to determine ways that this topic could be relevant in other video conferencing, or perhaps even asynchronous sessions with your students. But we are going to focus on stuff that's available in Zoom, and we're going to limit it to things that are available free within Zoom, because we want everything to be relevant to everyone here. There are a couple other things that you can do in paid Zoom accounts, and we can certainly talk about those too. So before we begin with introductions or anything like that, this is, if you're newer to Zoom, these are some things that we want you to know about. Really just 1 through 3 today, actually. Number 1 is how to mute yourself, and you are all muted currently, but you also always have the power to unmute yourself. And so that's down on the bottom left of your Zoom screen when it's open. Number 2 is how to turn on or turn off your video. And we like seeing faces, so if you'd like to turn on your video, that's nice for all of us participating today. And number 3 is where you'll find the chat. And that's where you find the chat if you're in full screen. If you're not in full screen, it might be under the more dots a little further over to the right. And the chat usually flashes when there's a new chat, so you'll be able to see that too. And my colleague Anita, who will introduce herself in a moment, will be monitoring the chat today. And we'd like you to use it freely and openly throughout this hour. So if you have questions or comments or ideas while the webinar is happening, put those in the chat and we will address them throughout and as we can. So please use that freely. We are starting with a bit of an assumption today. So I want to share that assumption with you. And if it's not true about you, we can give you some resources that will get you to this point. But the assumption we're starting with is that participants today, A, have a Zoom account. That's a starting place that we're not going to talk about today. And B, have used their own Zoom account. In other words, you've hosted a session of some sort. It might just be a one-on-one meeting with a parent or a colleague. It might be a full session with students, or a meeting with your staff if you're an administrator, but that you have scheduled meetings, sent out your link, opened and started a meeting, and hosted people. And the reason we're making those 2 assumptions is because at this point in all of our transition to remote learning, we wanted to be able to offer you something a little bit more and take you to, I've called it here student engagement, but it really could be staff, parent, community engagement. You can apply the word that fits best for your people. And we want to be able to do that in a deeper way. So we're not talking about sign up. We're not talking about privacy settings. If you're not at that point, if those assumptions are not true about you yet, Anita did a webinar probably about a month ago where she, in the same format context, reviewed how to set up a Zoom account and how to change all of your settings to make them safe. And that webinar is recorded, and her slides, which are very instructive, are also available publicly. So at some point she'll share that link in the chat as well to her own webinar where you can find it. Because if you don't have a Zoom account yet, if you haven't used it yet, that should be your starting place. You can still definitely hang out with us today because this will be your next step, right? So after you get those basics done, then you'll be ready for these engagement pieces. I'm going to pause just for a second so you can take that in for a minute. And if there are any questions about our premise or what we're sort of trying to do or offer today, you can put them in the chat. And as we think about that, Anita and I will introduce ourselves. I'll have Anita unmute in a moment and introduce herself, especially so you can see and hear her. But I wanted to share that we both are teachers, and we start as teachers. Our current titles at the intermediate unit are virtual learning specialists, and that informs a lot of what we offer today as well. But we work with the World of Learning Institute, which specifically offers world language classes to students throughout Pennsylvania and a little bit beyond. But as teachers, I think both of us, what we feel like we have to offer for you today are those engagement pieces about how to make sure that learning is happening in the virtual environment. And we did not make this switch in the past couple months. Anita made this switch years ago, and I made it last year. And so we've been teaching remotely for just, in some cases a little bit longer than many of you. And we both believe and have seen engaging learning happen. So not only do we believe it's possible, I would say we know it's possible, we've seen it. And so we want to kind of encourage you that though this transition is challenging, it's not, you should not view it initially as limiting. That if there are things you want to be able to do within the virtual context that you did in the brick and mortar, and you're like, this is so important to me, this teaching strategy or this idea, I need to be able to figure out a way to do this remotely. We think that's possible, and we want to help you figure it out. So I've taught for 8 years, most recently at Tyrone Area High School. I'm a language teacher as well as a social studies teacher. And now I work at the IU, and I'm excited to be with you today. Anita, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. So as Olivia said, so hi everyone, my name is Anita Young. And as Olivia mentioned, we both share both of those titles. Essentially, I was also brick and mortar teacher for 10 years and then made the transition to, I kind of did a little bit of both at the same time for a bit, and then have fully transitioned to virtual. So as Olivia said, we've been doing this for quite a while, and we see a lot of active engagement with students. And we see direct instruction, we see assessments, we see fun, we see participation. So we are pretty eager to share with you some of the things that we've done in the past, and then some of the things that also personally we have seen with our other friends and families that we've been working with, and some of the other groups we've been working with. So we're excited to share these resources with you. So please ask any questions at any time. We're very willing to help.
Okay. Thanks, Anita. Okay, so if you would find the chat, and we can maybe put a chat in there so you see it blinking again. What I'd like to ask you at this point is how you're using Zoom so far. And by that I mean one-on-one sessions, larger classes. Are you using it to communicate with parents? Are you using it to communicate with students? Are you an administrator using it to communicate with colleagues? Anything about how you're using Zoom to date. And we'll just get a collection of some of those ideas there in the chat if you're willing to share them. So I see lots of one-on-one. I see a lot of colleagues and administrators as well as students. Group Zoom sessions, people are doing too. Direct instruction. Casual chatting, but maybe we're moving to that next step of having an actual lesson on Zoom. Parent meetings. And then people who are just getting started, and that's totally fine too. And like we said, if you need to take it a step back and look at some setup features, Anita has a webinar on that. And then when you're ready, you can always come back to this one too. IEP meetings, great.
So big mix, so.
A mix, yeah. And like I said, Anita and I we will be tempted to speak as teachers. And when we teach, 90% of the time, we have more than one student, or even more than that. So we teach in what we would call sort of more of a classroom setting. So my examples will be coming from my language classes. And what I want to encourage you to think about, and you can remind me in the chat too, to kind of keep this perspective, is ways in which each one of these tools can be adapted for your settings. So I hope to give you an example, not to limit, but sort of hopefully to expand some ideas, and you can obviously adapt them to your specifics. So I want to start with the wheel image, and I want to encourage you not to reinvent the wheel. So I want to begin this discussion by thinking about things that we already do, because most of you, I imagine, are coming from brick and mortar settings, things that we already do, that we know good teachers do. And then we're going to think about how we can do those in the remote environment. So before we think of the remote environment as this whole new beast, we're going to start from what we do know, because I imagine many of you have many more years of experience than I do. So that's what you should be drawing on, is that experience. So I want to ask you again in the chat, if you would share a pedagogical strategy or move that teachers can do, no matter how small or big, that you think is a piece of good teaching. And I can start with sharing one. I think classroom routines are a piece of good teaching, including things like a bell ringer or a beginning exercise, maybe an exit slip, transition routines. So any kind of pedagogical teaching strategies that you think are really key in your classroom environment that you're hoping will translate over here to the virtual environment. I love it. Differentiation, reflection, repetition, assessment, communication, pausing. It's probably a hint to me, I should pause. Check for understanding. Feedback. Providing choice, good, yeah, I like that too. Good reminder. Classroom rules, engagement. And there may be specific strategies that you're thinking too. Man, I love think, pair, share. And that feels so brick and mortar. You know, you write on your own piece of paper, you turn to your partner. How do we make, like, I love that strategy. It's a great strategy. Can I use it in the virtual environment? Any other strategies that are your wheel that you don't want to have to reinvent? Brain bakes, reading aloud,
Yeah,
together.
those are good ones.
They're fantastic, yeah. So that's our bank of knowledge. Like, we are 61 educators here together, and we have however many, probably hundreds of years of experience collectively. So that's the wheel, and now we just need to figure out how to bring that wheel into the virtual environment, and specifically today within Zoom. So I want to mention 3 things to keep in mind about the virtual engagement that are important to me before we look at specific tools. One is establishing routines. Just like a brick and mortar, establishing some routines, teaching them explicitly to your students, practicing them and repeating them, I believe can help create structure, but also is part of community building, because your students will come to know, this is what we do when we meet with Mrs. So-and-so, and that feels consistent and feels like a part of a community, or a part of a relationship if it's one-on-one. Number 2 is I want to encourage you for your own learning right now to keep it simple. Just like we scaffold for students, do the same for yourself. Start with one tool in Zoom. Start with whichever one seems easiest. You don't have to overthink it. If there's one that's easy, use that one. When you feel good about it, add your second one, and so on. And also, even with a comfort with all of these cool tools, sometimes my very best class is one where we just stay in gallery view, which is where you can see everybody in their little boxes on the screen, and we just unmute our mics and we talk with each other. So don't feel like a tool inherently is going to make your session more engaging, right? There may be ways to stay engaging without tools. So I want to encourage you in that as well. And finally, and this is something that I have to give a shout out to my supervisor, Pat Mulroy, for reminding us always to do this. But especially in tough times like these, focus on some emotions, some feelings first. And I think this applies if you're holding a staff meeting or if you're meeting with students. Take time at the beginning of a class to check in about how your students are doing, how your colleagues are doing. It can be done kind of creatively, elaborately with one of these tools. It can be done very privately using the private chat, or it can be done very casually and openly using a full class gallery view kind of discussion. But think intentionally about how you want to provide people an opportunity to share how they're doing. And so Anita has provided this opportunity for all of us to share how we're doing today. Since we said that, we will put our money where our mouths are. And we're going to use the stamp tool. So the stamp tool is inside your annotate tools. And the way that you find your annotate tools on a computer is by going to View Options, which should be probably near the top of your screen, and then clicking Annotate. And you'll see a toolbar pop up. And maybe 4 or 5 over from the left, you'll see something that says Stamp. And at any point, if finding these things while also listening to a webinar is too much, that's fine. You can try them afterwards. You can watch the recording. But anybody who can find those, let's stamp which one of these images most accurately represents your emotions about your live sessions in Zoom so far. How are we feeling? Lots of 3s. Then don't feel bad about stamping right on top or making a mess out of the screen. We can clear it with a single click. So we've got no one's screaming, I don't think. So that's probably a good sign. Nobody there on 1. Some biting nails on 4. Lots of people feeling like they're doing fine.
Olivia, someone asked, how do they grab their annotate tools from an iPad?
So on an iPad,
there's a little pencil in the corner, usually in the bottom left-hand corner, that you can find. And if the stamp is not missing, I know on iPhones, I don't believe they have a stamp. I'm not sure about an iPad. So you could always just grab the draw tool, circle, and just circle it there. That's fine too.
And that's a good pedagogical move too that Anita just did, is like always providing options, especially when we're talking about technology. Some students might be on their phones, some might be on their iPads. They all have annotate options, but what's available there might be different. Another side note is if your student is using a school issued Chromebook, annotate is sometimes not enabled. And that's an IT question for that specific district or school. And there are ways around that too. But always offering an alternative is a good idea. So the draw tool is an alternative. Okay, great. Thanks for sharing.
Feedback, yeah.
Yeah, so I just cleared that with a click, right? If I want them all back, I can actually undo it. So nothing's really lost. A more age appropriate adaptation. This is just to encourage you to think as we go through this about adaptation. So if I show something and you think I couldn't use that, think about another way that you might be able to. So, we could pull some kind of images like this and we could ask our students, or we could find it in another language and we could ask our students, or without language, and we could ask them to click on it. So, okay. Having said all that, we're ready to officially get started. And what I would like to show with you now is all tools that are available within Zoom and that are available in free accounts. And the ones specifically that we're going to go through are the whiteboard with all of the annotate tools, 2 ways to do nonverbal feedback, what breakout rooms are, and what a green screen is and how you might use it. One tool that's also available in free accounts that I'm not going to specifically mention or specifically delve into is remote control. Remote control can definitely also be used in a pedagogical way. It's when you give the other user control of your screen. I would say it is best in one-on-one sessions, which it looks like a lot of you are using. But it is not available if the other person is on a phone or an iPad. So it's a little bit limited in that way. But if you want to talk about remote control or you think it would fit your context well, we can talk about that sort of in the Q&A at the end, or you can ask some quick questions about it to Anita in the chat. Okay, so we're going to start with whiteboard and annotate together. And the first thing to know about that, the most basic piece, is that you have to be sharing a screen in order for anyone to annotate. So if we're in gallery view and we're all chatting, nobody can annotate on our videos, on our pictures of ourselves. However, as soon as you share any screen, I'm sharing a slideshow right now, I could be sharing a website with you, I could be sharing my email inbox with you. Anybody who's in the meeting can start to annotate on that screen. I'm going to show you all examples using the whiteboard, which is labeled 2 right here, number 2. The whiteboard, it just gives you a completely white blank background for people to annotate on top of, but there are a lot of times in class where you might want them annotating on something other than a blank background. You might want them marking up a text or an image. And so some of my examples will include things that are other than just the whiteboard. So the 3 steps are: you click share screen, you click on the whiteboard or whatever screen you want to share, and then you click on the share button on the bottom right. This is what the annotate toolbar looks like for the host. There's 1, maybe 2 slight differences for a participant who's attending, but for the most part, it's very similar for a participant as well. And we're going to share this slideshow with you. So if this particular slide is one you'd like to be able to share with students or parents, it's a nice kind of overview of all the options that are there. So we'll just go left to right and look through these I'll explain them very briefly here, and then I'll show them to you. You can type on the screen rather than trying to write with a pencil. That's very difficult. You can actually type on the screen. You can use a pencil, which allows you to draw lines. You can also change the thickness of those lines, and you can draw shapes on the screen. You can stamp. This is the 3rd one over, and the one that we showed you a minute ago. And there's 6 sticker stamps that you can use. As the host of a meeting, you can point with your own arrow, which I've done a little bit of today, and I'll show you right now. So I can take this arrow and my name will be associated with wherever I point. All of your participants can also point, and then you can see where everybody's pointing. So you can ask them to point to something on the screen. As the host, you can also use this spotlight to follow along with some text or draw your students' attention to a certain part of the screen. Spotlight is not a feature that participants can use. They can just use the arrow option. The 5th thing over is erasing. So you can erase individual markings, your own or your students, sort of one by one. That's a little bit slower, but that is an option. The 6th option over here says changing color, font size, line, width of text. This is where you make edits to your draw tool or to your text tool. So this format button controls and modifies both of those tools. The next 2 are undo and redo. That just undoes or redoes the most recent annotation. So when I erased all your stamps and then I wanted them back, I just clicked undo. If you want to clear the screen very quickly, either because it's very messy or because something popped up that you don't want on the screen, intentionally or by mistake, you can clear all annotations with a click. And someone mentioned classroom management when they were talking about their wheel that we're not reinventing. One thing I would encourage, a lot of people are nervous about making that shift in classroom management in the remote environment. And obviously we have to have securities in place, and Anita's webinar addresses those. Something I would remind you about is that in a lot of ways, if you were able to manage classrooms in person, you have all of those controls and probably more in the virtual environment, because you can erase things literally with a click. Which is obviously not possible, in a real environment. You can also mute people. You can turn off people's videos. So it's a level of power that's almost a little bit concerning. But you have a lot of power in the virtual environment. And then finally, and this is a cool tool, if your students are doing work that you are proud of or you want to refer back to, maybe in the next class, you want to be able to come back and ask them about it. With a single click, you can save a screenshot of just the whiteboard, and it won't save the videos and the chat and all the other mess that's on your screen right now. It'll just save it like a picture of the whiteboard. And then you can bring that back, a couple days later and talk about it with kids again or with colleagues. So these are all the tools. I want to show you one example of something I've done in a class with each one of these. And as I do, I remind you I'm a high school teacher and I'm a language teacher. But I would encourage you, if you're comfortable with flipping back and forth to the chat box, if you're listening and an idea pops up and you think, oh, this is how I could do this in chemistry, please share that, because there are 60 some of us here, and there's probably some other chemistry teacher, and it would be really nice for them to see that idea too. So my examples will be specific, but you can sort of broaden this for us. So if we look at the text tool, and that's where you'll find it, you can come back to this afterwards to play around and try to find them. I'm not a math teacher, but cross-curricularly, sometimes we do math and Spanish. So this is a screenshot of a class with some Spanish students, and they had timed themselves completing flashcards. And so then they, using the text tool, typed up their individual times, competing against me, and they added together their times, and maybe we came up with average times. We played around with numbers in Spanish using the text tool on the screen. So that's just an example of how the text tool might be used. There are literally thousands of other possibilities. And maybe if you have an idea or if you've used it already with students in a way that's been successful and you want to pop that in the chat, feel free to do that. All the students' images and names who I show here are students who I have permission from their parents or guardians to share their image. And if not, then those are the ones where you don't see their image. So the second tool is the draw tool. That's the next one over. And I wanted to just show you all the things it can do. So this is without changing color. This is just showing you kind of the features it has. So a thin line, a thick line, a diamond, a square, a circle, filled in, kind of opaque arrows with two-sided arrows, one-sided arrows. And that's, again, that's without changing the colors yet. So under format, I could change the colors. So draw tool is probably one of the most versatile, obviously. And I just want to give you a couple ideas. So top right, I divided my whiteboard into 8 boxes or 9 boxes with a red line in the draw tool. And then I assigned a spot to each student by typing in their name. And then I asked them to use their annotate tools to draw how they're feeling. That was my process for that one. That was my process for the bottom one too, although there I only had 6 students. And so I probably, if I remember correctly, I probably didn't assign them a spot. I probably just said claim a spot. And they can sort of claim a spot and start drawing. And once one student has drawn in a box, then I tell the others not to draw in that box. And, you know, in a language class, we can be doing this in the target language. If it's a content area and you want this to be a really quick step, you can make this something that, you know, everybody has 30 seconds to draw something and then you can move on to something else. We do have teachers in the world of learning who have also assigned each student a color, either for the day or even for the whole year. And then when the student annotates using the text tool or the draw tool, they always use that color. And that's a way, especially in a class of, you know, maybe 6 to 8 students, where you can always kind of keep track of who's annotating and you know whose work is whose without creating these boxes necessarily. So again, I'm not really looking at the chat right now, but any other ideas, people have done cool things with the draw tool, please feel free to share them. Mine is just one idea, right?
Olivia, I'm going to hop in real quick. Someone did ask, like, when they do, like, they like the activities, but and when they do save the image, where does it go? So that was brought up in the chat. So again, for those of you that didn't see the chat, it saves into a folder, a Zoom folder in your documents on your computer. So you will always have access to it after the meeting.
Thanks, Anita. And Zoom creates the folder automatically. Like once you have a Zoom account, the very first time you click save and save something, it will create a Zoom. In fact, if you already have a Zoom account, it's already on your computer. It's under documents. It's called Zoom. And that's where it will save your recordings, your chat, your screenshots, all those kinds of things. We can think about this as positive reinforcement, team building, community building. In my case, I was doing it in Spanish, so I felt this was content as well, practice. Recently I've felt like Hangman might not be politically correct anymore, I'm not sure, but we played Hangman. We've also recently been playing Pictionary, and for a language class, it's gone very well. Because the word, of course, can be in the target language. We're saying letters out loud in the target language. This may seem more appropriate for younger students, or it might just be a quick break or a reward for older students. I'm doing this with 11th and 12th graders, and they're enjoying themselves. So I wouldn't assume that, you know, older students won't enjoy something like this. You can use microphones if it's a smaller group. If it's a larger group and microphones seems like it'll just be confusing or interrupt each other, you can always use the chat box to communicate guesses and things like that with each other. Oh, so this was teams. So instead of dividing the screen for every student, we divided the screen for teams. So I'm sure you could think of ways as a math teacher or as an English teacher that you could put students in 2 teams, divide the screen. Everybody can work on the screen at the same time. So each side, or an art teacher, right, could be working on something, and then there could be some way of rewarding or recognizing one team. I usually just take the draw tool myself and I draw a trophy on one side or the other. or like a ribbon, and that's it's their virtual trophy. So just some ideas with Draw Tool. Going on to Stamp Tool, obviously it's a way to indicate something in an anonymous way, right? So we don't know who's stamped what. So if you want to give your students an opportunity to be really open and honest, especially about something like their feelings, Stamp Tool might be a nice option. Again, you can divide your whiteboard into spots, and this was also teams. It was a larger class. This class might have been 12 or 15 students. And so I divided and gave them spots to play tic-tac-toe, and we can pull this off in like under a minute. I create the 6 divisions, and then I allow the teams to create their own boxes so that I'm not going through and taking my time to create all of the boxes. And then they can play tic-tac-toe, and it can, I think Marissa, somebody mentioned brain breaks. This can be a brain break that you can pull off in under a minute, especially once your class has learned it, right? Or your student has learned it, and then you can go back to the lesson again. More pedagogically, perhaps, rather than just as a brain break, you can use the stamp tool to vote on something. In this case, it was a preference kind of vote, like te gusta café or te gusta té? Do you like coffee or tea? We were obviously doing this in a Spanish class, and then we can talk about how many people like coffee and how many people like tea, and why do you like coffee and why do you like tea, and do you like it with sugar? But if we think about other content areas, this could be a way for students in a very low stakes way to indicate, for example, if there were 3 answers to a math problem on the screen, they could indicate which one they thought was right without having to associate their name with it. So it would be low stakes formative assessment that would tell you some information without putting them out there. The other thing is, because it's all visual, even if you were doing sort of which answer is right, there's going to be a first student who first puts their stamp down, and then there's going to be a second. And obviously at some point, it'll become clear which answer is more popular or which answer is right. My feeling about that is that gives those more hesitant students an opportunity to participate, but still kind of follow somebody else. So it's definitely not a summative assessment. But even though they can see each other's answers, I think it's a great way to let everybody participate without a lot of anxiety. So, and I see that we are still having a couple people join us, and welcome. We're really happy that you're joining us, and this is all being recorded, and so you can go back and find it afterwards too. So other ideas about how you could use the stamp tool. Someone mentioned choice is part of their wheel, right? Of not wanting to reinvent the wheel. This would be a great way as a class to indicate, if you had a choice board of some sort, what kind of activity you want to do, right? Quickly vote. The next tool that I want to show you is the spotlight tool, which, like I said, as the host can be a spotlight or an arrow. As a participant, I think it's just an arrow. The spotlight stays kind of on and just follows your mouse as you move across the screen. The arrow lands wherever you click. So the arrow is a way to really like click on something, indicate it, and then even if your mouse moves, your arrow has kind of clicked on that. And the arrow includes your name. So if you want to do, again, you could think of this as formative assessment, but you don't want it to be anonymous. If you want to quickly see who clicks, and I know Anita uses this as a way to sometimes award points or decide who a winner is in something, you will see a name pop up. And the first name, it won't be hard to tell. The first name that pops up is the person who clicked first. So if you want something a little more definitive, you can use the arrow tool. Here's an example. These are Arabic letters from one of my Arabic classes, and you can see a student's arrow there. You can, in your own, you can reimagine this with our English letters in a lower level class, asking students, where's the letter A, where's the letter K? And they can quickly be pointing to it. And you can keep it moving. Where's this, where's that, where's this, where's that? And students are clicking, and if they're watching somebody else click, you know, whatever, if they're getting there a second later. If it's one-on-one, obviously it could be a summative assessment, because there's only one kid clicking, so you know if they're getting it right or wrong. Like I said, Anita gamifies this by having students click on the correct image. Whoever clicks the thing correctly first gets a point. You could do this at a much higher level in high school or even college. Again, I can imagine this with historical facts. I can imagine this with math problems, with the periodic table, any number of things, right? That people, I always laugh because I hesitate as soon as I start trying to give like science examples. I'm sure that I'm gonna reveal myself. So I'll leave it at that. You can think about what you'd like to do with it. And if you have great ideas, share them. Or if you have not great ideas, if you have, mediocre ideas, share them in the chat. So, if you're, again, keep it simple. So if you want to just start, to some degrees, maybe, I think I would say almost the arrow tool might be one of the first things I'd start with. Students can point to things, you can point to things. But if you are feeling good about where you are and you want to take it up a level, play around with format. Format lets you change color, which might just seem like we're doing it for aesthetic purposes, but there are a lot of pedagogical reasons to do that too. Like I said, you could assign different students, there's 15 colors here. So you can have up to 15 students, everybody could have their own color. And that could be a way of indicating their answer. It could be a little bit more anonymous too. If you assign them in the private chat a color, it would be a way for you to know how people answered without them necessarily knowing. They can change size, which is important because sometimes everybody starts out with a big text size and there just isn't enough space on the screen. So you can get the size to be, pretty small like that right there, probably even smaller. And then if they're in the draw tool, then you can be changing line width as well as color. So this over here just shows you some different colors, some sizes, some bold, some italics, everything that's kind of available there. I don't have, this next slide is not a pedagogically instructive slide. Believe it or not, this was something that a bunch of adults created and maybe some of you. So my messiest slide here is not from the students. But if we open up a whiteboard and we just let everybody kind of have at it and play, which we're gonna do in a minute, and play with colors and shapes and sizes. This was a group of, I think Anita was hosting a webinar with something like 100 people, and everybody can still be on there once. It's gonna be a mess. But then with one click, Anita can clear the entire thing. So again, there's that power. So let's try it. I am going to click New Share, and then I'm gonna click Whiteboard, and then I'm gonna click Share. And now I'm sharing, I'm gonna make it full screen. I'm sharing a whiteboard, hopefully, with all of you. And you're all being very polite because no one's messed it up yet. So you can go to View Options, Annotate, and as long as it's school appropriate, you can put whatever you want on this screen. Try the stamp tool, try the text. Feel free to click with the arrow and see what that looks like. Try to change the size or shape or color of what you're doing. Barb, I saw your arrow. So everything you do is anonymous until you kind of own it by using the arrow, which I see Anita doing and Christine doing. So that's the one way you make something not anonymous. Or if you, type your name or put your name by your work, then that makes it not anonymous. I'm seeing some people, somebody's used that orange box, and I don't have a screenshot of this, but I wanted to offer up another thought. You can use that box to cover up part of your screen. So, and again, you think about the pedagogical ways you might use this, but let's say I want to cover, let's say I have words for matching or definitions, and I want to cover all the definitions over here on the right. So I can cover them. I just drew that big green box, right? I could cover all the definitions in green, ask students to maybe type answers on top of that green. And then if I want to show them again, I can erase my green box by just clicking the erase button, right? And then now I'm revealing what I had on the screen again. So I'm sure you can think of a lot of ways. I'm thinking about like a health teacher, one of my colleagues at Tyrone, who would do a lot of things with anatomy images, right? And you could cover up pieces of the anatomy and ask students what's behind that. And then you could reveal them by getting rid of that box again. Okay. These are your last couple moments for fun. Anita, would you do how you make people stop
Yeah.
drawing?
So one of the easiest routines that you can do, and that I've witnessed actually with my daughter who's in preschool, them doing it, is they do a little countdown right before they're going to clean their screen. So we talked about classroom management, right? So it kind of gives them that countdown so they know, hey, this is about to be erased and I want you to stop annotating. So we can say we're going to clear the screen in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then we can go ahead and clear the screen. And hopefully it prevents that student who is kind of a little goofy maybe from continuing to write. And if they do, who did that, right? We can kind of almost like joke about it a little bit, but almost to the point where it's like, all right, we said we were going to clear the screen. We're going to move on, okay? And kind of discipline a little bit that way. So if that helps.
Right, and as a reminder, the moment that I stop sharing, you actually can't write anymore. So if you're like, what if they still don't listen to me, right? At the moment that I click, which I'll do right now, stop share, and we're all back in gallery view, your annotate tools are gone. So you even beyond that clear option, you even have one other layer of control, right? Okay, and I did remember to hit save, so I will be able to share that lovely piece of art with all of you in some format afterwards, or maybe your art will show up in some sort of webinar in the future. But I took that screenshot, so I'll be able to see that whiteboard image afterwards. Okay, so that was the biggest chunk, and I am looking at our time. We will stop by 1 o'clock, and if you have to leave, again, this will be recorded, so do what you need to do. The smaller pieces now that we're going to talk about nonverbal feedback, breakout rooms, chat box, maybe something else that I forgot about. So, but annotate is probably your biggest set of tools. So nonverbal feedback, there are 2 ways to do this. And both of these will still indicate to you who has answered this way. So this is a way to get data, whether that's assessment data or preference data or whatever, and know who has responded. These are not anonymous. So one, and it's more involved or provides more feedback, is that you can instruct your students to select, you tell them click on the participants box. From there, by their own name, they'll be able to raise their hand, say yes, say no, do this little go slower, go faster. And I think there are some other things too, like a little coffee cup, other little cute images. I'm always, when a student like of their own accord puts a coffee cup up, I'm always like, what does that mean? Are you leaving and going and getting your coffee now? I didn't used to see that when we were still teaching in brick and mortars, but now that everybody's at home, sometimes you see a little coffee cup pop up. So we're gonna try it right now. Click on participants. And under the list of participants, you'll see that yes, no, go slower, other options there for yourself. And I'm gonna ask you a question. Are you we're gonna do morning person or evening person. So are you a morning person, yes or no? Now, if you look down through the participant list, you can see how people are checking, but it would take you as a participant quite a while to count them up. So let me tell you what it looks like as a host. As a host at the bottom, I get total tallies. So we have 22 people who say they're a morning person, and we have 14 people who say they are not. So that's our tally for that. And just as a reminder where to find that, click on participants. And this is if you're on a computer, you click on participants and then it's under all the names there. Okay, I can also clear them all as a host. So now I'll ask another question. Are you we'll do hot dogs or hamburgers. Are you a hot dog person? Yes or no? And we see the numbers going up. We're at 17 for hot dogs, 18, 19 no, 20 no. And people might click on and off of it. They might be changing their opinion. And at the same time, we got one person gave a thumbs up and one person gave a thumbs down. So a little bit of some people who went a little bit outside the instructions. So that's one way to give nonverbal feedback. The other way to give nonverbal feedback, Anita did, maybe some other people did while I wasn't looking, and that is across the bottom of your Zoom screen, in the same place where you saw participants and chat, there's one called reactions, and there's only 2 options there. You can clap or give a thumbs up. So it is a little more limited. But it's a nice way to build some community and some rapport. So if I stopped sharing and we were all looking at each other, you can navigate down there to reactions and give me a thumbs up or a clap. It will boost my self-esteem. Thank you. Students give a presentation, or maybe you just build some classroom norms around, like if you agree with a statement said, then go ahead and give a thumbs up. That might be like a discussion norm, right, that you could implement. You could use it as a hand raising thing. If whoever wants to speak next, give me a thumbs up. It could be a hand raising option too. Yeah, does this make sense? True or false? Are you with me? Who's still there? Who hears me? Thumbs up, everybody. You still with me? Yeah, like Sheila's got her old fat. You just put your own thumbs up, right? If you have under 25 people or whatever fits on a screen, right, then that's fine too. We can just do it old-fashioned style too. Okay, cool. So that's nonverbal feedback. I don't have a specific example of how I've used that with students beyond the ones that I just gave you. But if you have ideas about how you might use that, feel free to share those too in the chat. And now I want to talk about breakout rooms. Breakout rooms are, to me, they're one of my favorite things in Zoom. And before I use them with classes of 15 students sometimes. Before I give that example, I want to also acknowledge that we have a lot of teachers at the IU have started using them in very small groups, even if it's just themselves and another student or two, or themselves and a colleague and a student or two. So we'll think about this pretty broadly too, as far as how it could be used. But let me tell you first what it is, or rather, let me tell you first where to find it. You only see it when you're the host. So don't look for it right now, because you still have it. It is available in free Zoom. Don't worry if you don't see it right now. You'll also only see it if you're full screen. So if you're in not full screen, it might be under your more list. It looks like those 4 little boxes I have circled down there, bottom right. So you click on breakout rooms and there's lots and lots of options, and I'm happy to follow up with anybody about all the details. I won't go into them right now. The most basic thing to know is when you click on breakout rooms, this pop-up is going to come up. You choose how many participants or how many rooms you want. The number of participants is going to be already listed there. Right now ours would say 58 participants, and I would say put them in 10 rooms. If I tell it to put them in 10 rooms automatically, it'll take 58 divided by 10. It'll try to create some evenly distributed rooms. If I say manually, it'll pop up a list of all 58 names with checkboxes next to them. And I can click checks for who I want to put in room 1. And then it'll narrow down my list, and I'll check for room 2, and it'll narrow down my list again. When I'm done with that, I click create rooms. And under basic settings, all of you would get a little message that says you're being invited to go to room number 4 or room number 5, and you would accept that. If that extra step is too much for your students, depending on their abilities or their age, you can make it so that it sends people to the room automatically without them having to click accept. So you can just sort of push people to rooms. What happens once you've done that, this is my visual for it. This is my sort of, just graphic way of visualizing it. I'm still here in the main room, but my students start breaking out into these smaller rooms as they accept. So breakout room 1 might have 3 people, breakout room 2 might have 3, breakout room 3 might have 3. And from my vantage point, I can go and visit each one of those rooms. Students can't bounce between rooms unless I move them, but I can go and visit whichever room for as much or as little time as I want. So obviously, if you're a regular kind of classroom teacher, and even if you're thinking about next fall, if your school might do some online stuff next fall, this is a way that group work is still possible. So the idea that you can't do group work in a virtual environment, we're going to nix that idea, because it's possible, and I do it all the time. So just like in your own classroom, there's a certain element of classroom management, there's a certain element of trust. Students are working on their own. You might not overhear or catch everything that's said. So you want to keep yourself, just like we cycle around the room, you cycle through the breakout rooms. Just keep yourself moving, right? You can close them at any time. You can bring everybody back at any time. You can send messages you can send a message from your vantage point out to all the breakout rooms. So you could be giving steps or instructions. You could scaffold. You could say, when everybody go to the breakout room, step 1 is just going to be to come up with a team name. And then while they're in there, a minute or two later, you could send instructions and say, okay, step 2, everybody, needs to be working on problem number 7 with their team. And one person's responsible for, recording their work, whatever. Step number 3, you give them a couple minutes later. And then maybe you say, okay, we're coming back. You have 60 seconds to finish. So you can send them those messages while they're out there. And actually, it's really nice because, okay, in the brick and mortar, you have to have everybody listen up. I have another piece of instructions to give, right? This is a way of, without interrupting the entire class, trying to get everybody quiet. You just give instructions in written form that go out to everybody. So some ideas that I put on the screen, students can obviously work on group projects. But now we're seeing more innovative things happen now that more of us are online. And I'm seeing people who are in a co-teaching situation or with an aide or a para. So if you're looking for ways to engage your aide or para, you can split your class in 2. One of you can be in one breakout room, the other can be in the other. This is a way that a student could go in with just a partner and practice a skill in a really low stakes environment before they have to do it in front of everybody, practice a presentation. People in the breakout room can share you can enable it so they can share their screen with each other. So if they were practicing presentations, they could be doing that in the breakout room. And then we've also seen people using it where somebody who has to pull a student, right? We talk about like pulling a student in the classroom and you're sitting out in the hallway and you're doing some reading assessment with them. This can happen now in a little bit more of a controlled environment. You could have your special ed teacher or your social worker or your counselor could push into your Zoom room. You can invite them to come to your Zoom room. Maybe you have 5 students in there, but they just want to pull one of them. You could just put the 2 of them in a breakout room. One of the things we're finding is that a lot of parents and students are experiencing some fatigue around, I have 5 Zoom sessions scheduled a day. So if you kind of work with your team, you might be able to get one session that all of you kind of agree on, but you can pull students for the different things you need them for. So it's a way to think about collaboration.
I'm going to interrupt you here because we've gotten a few questions. When you are recording, the recording does not happen in the breakout rooms, right? It just records.
That's right. No, it follows you. It follows the teacher.
Okay.
So it actually does. So if I go into a room, it records the room I'm in. Were there other questions?
No, that was the main one. So a few people had asked that. So thank you.
And I've done a lot more work on breakout rooms with some of you that I see here. So there are a lot of settings you can mess around with and change. So if you'd like to, recently, I know I have just 2 or 3 minutes left, but just this past week with my students, I had them moving. It was like musical chairs breakout rooms. I would give them like 2 or 3 minutes to talk about a topic, and then I moved one student to like out of each room to the next room. So I can sit with my list of names and I can move people. And then they had another topic for 2 minutes and then I moved them again. So you can play around with stuff once you, like any of this, once you get comfortable with it. Okay, the very last thing I want to show you is just the green screen option. The way that you get to it is next to video by clicking the little caret and you say choose virtual background. It'll pop up this window on the bottom right. You can upload, it has some stock images in there and then you can upload images. Some people want this and some of your students will want this because they may not feel good about what's in the background at home. So this is a way to kind of to protect a little bit if someone doesn't want a certain part of their physical context shown. But it's also pedagogical, which is what I'll focus on. So like this is me in front of a lake and a volcano in Guatemala, and I'm using again in language, but social studies, geography, like anything under those social studies categories, we can think about literature, poetry, theater, like you're starting a new novel and you show up and you're actually in front of, the Parthenon, and the students can ask, what is that? Where is that? Right? And you can have them start to speculate about the context of that play or that piece of poetry. And then it could be school pride stuff, or it could be culture, community building stuff. Maybe you put your, on certain days or certain holidays, certain times a year, you put something in the background that's related to that context. So lots of ways to think about using the green screen. It's available in everybody's Zoom. You don't have to actually have a green screen. It's best to have kind of a clear background, like a solid background, but it doesn't actually have to be in front of a green screen. It could be in front of Anita, I think you use a curtain?
Yeah, I was just putting that in the chat box. So I spent like $8 on Amazon, have it on a curtain. Doesn't look pretty. It's not the prettiest curtain, but it's being hung up and and it works. Some people, you know what I mean, construction paper, typically like with a pretty clear white background, it works, or like a tan background, it usually works okay. You just kind of have to play around with it a little bit.
There's something I want to say before we lose anybody, because it's coming close to whatever time it's coming close to, 1 o'clock. Anita and I are going to host a workshop. We're calling it a workshop instead of a webinar. It's going to be for a limited number of participants, but open to whomever signs up, sort of in a first come, first serve basis. The reason we're limiting it is because we want to actually create a little classroom environment, and we want to play the role of teachers and have you play the role of students. And we want to let you experience some of this stuff. So we want to put you in a breakout room to chat with each other. We want to let you annotate on the screen or read a text on the screen, play a game with us, play tic-tac-toe, play whatever. So we want to keep it to like a classroom size of 20 or 25 people. So if you would like to join us, it will be in a Wednesday or two, May 20th at noon. And Anita will put the registration link that's also in this PowerPoint that you can pull from the extended campus site. We'd love to have you join us, and we'd love to have different content areas and different aged teachers or administrators join us so that we can continue to brainstorm. But instead of me just talking the whole time, it will be an interactive session. So you should come ready to interact for the whole time period. So I wanted to say that because obviously there's always more than you can cover. We had other ideas of things we could share with you, but we will get to do that in that webinar if you're really interested in digging a little deeper. And I also, so the final tool, I feel it's important to say, don't forget about the chat box. It's so simple, but you can do formative assessment with it. You can do summative assessment with it. You can do classroom discussion with it. You can allow students to interact between each other, or you can tell them they can't. You can make it so that they can't. Students can tell you privately when they have an issue going on. So it's a great way for a student to be able to privately interact with you, especially if there's something personal going on. And it can happen anytime during the session. So it's a great way to say, if you have a question, put it in the chat box and you can always get back to them. And that's something actually that a brick and mortar classroom doesn't have. I mean, I shouldn't say it doesn't have it. Maybe some of you have figured it out. That was a hard part for me. Students always had questions, and it was always in between those two bells, of 3 minutes that you're trying to interact with students. And the chat box can kind of hold people's thoughts. You can save the chats and you can always come back to them. So I wanted to get that in at the very end. So register for our workshop if you think you'd like to try this hands-on. And know that we at the World of Learning, Anita and I and our supervisor, Pat, are very happy to help people make this transition. Also know that there are lots of webinars and recordings on topics far broader than just this one for teachers through Intermediate Unit 8 at the Extended Campus site. And we're also offering office hours that you can also find at the Extended Campus site if you really want something one-on-one where we just try any one of these tools or ideas with you. And it's not just Anita and I, there's probably 8 or 10 of us, including administrators, who have office hours on a variety of topics. So you could find the person that fits your needs best and you could meet with them. I know I went over time. I don't even want to look at my clock. So feel free to drop out whenever you have to drop out. I'm happy to stick around for a couple of minutes if people have questions and you want to unmute and ask those at this point. We could do that more informally, or if you want to keep putting them in the chat box, that's fine too. But thank you all for coming and for staying dedicated to the work in unprecedented times.